Hello, everyone. We're going to get going straight away because one of the reasons is we're sort of limited a little bit in terms of time because of the free account, but that's partly because we want to time bound this so that people feel like it's not onerous and it's a space for discussion, but it's not going to drag on. So that's one of the things I was going to say first of all. And then I wanted to welcome everyone to the first in our series of these autumn provocations. And the Radical School Geography then has come about over the last couple of years, a group of educators who've come together with the aim of pushing geography's critical edge. And we're all about supporting and developing a new and better society through the way and the what that we teach in schools. And we are inspired by a whole variety of characters. And the idea is that we're trying to draw those people into this discussion and give people an opportunity to learn from, be inspired and to be provoked as well. So the idea is that some of this is trying to challenge our thinking. So this first one, we're joined by Bridget Mckenzie, and Bridget has been, well, she's a sort of a character who's jumped between lots of different projects. I guess some of the big staple things she's done in the past, I guess, are she was the education officer for the Tate and head of learning at the British Library. But I think there's probably a whole variety of other projects that you've been involved with alongside that, and some of the ones that have really caught my eye and have been the most inspiring recently have been your involvement with the Culture Declares Emergency and all of the other projects that have come off the back of that, and then also the Climate Museum UK group and everything you've been doing through that. So I'm going to hand over to you. The intention is we're going to run through the presentation and then there'll be the opportunity for questions at the end.
Okay, hello everyone. So I'm going to share my screen and start. So I'm going to talk about how can we respond to young people's concerns about the Earth crisis. And I'm going to talk about, oh, hang on, just needing to work out how I can, yeah, there we go. So I'm going to talk about my three hats quickly. The context, which is, a radical change in geography, future anxiety in young people. I'm going to talk a bit about a project we did with A New Direction, which was a listening project to young people, and some pointers for experimental and collaborative practice that might enable us to listen to young people and really respond to their concerns. And just to point out here, a bit of news from today, a news report which is about the number of environmental activists who are being murdered consistently. And so young people are included in this. Young people like this Colombian boy, Francisco Vera, has been receiving death threats. So it isn't a safe thing to do. In some ways, turning your concerns into activism is a good coping strategy. It's to be encouraged, but at the same time, it's not entirely a safe and easy option, particularly not outside the UK. So Climate Museum UK is a mobile and digital museum that stirs and collects responses to the climate and ecological emergency. And we're a collective, we're a team of creative people. And we produce and we gather art and objects, ideas, games and books, and then we use them in multiple activities to activate people. So we're not so much about exhibitions as we are about activations. We don't just show, we really want to activate people. And our structure is quite horizontal, it's evolving, it's distributed, it's inspired by mycorrhizae. I won't talk through this diagram because it will take too long, but just to help you envisage this notion of a distributed collective museum that doesn't have a single building and possibly never will, but where people are working in partnerships locally. So my other hat is Culture Declares Emergency, which I co-founded. It's a movement, a growing movement of individuals and organisations in the cultural sector, which is a very wide definition, and they're declaring climate and ecological emergency. And after this, declaration, they're forming community to take action and also to seek justice. So it isn't just about, making a statement. It's not a marketing program. So my third hat is Flow Associates, and this has been a hat, quite an old hat now, since 2005, and it's a research organization. We do a lot of evaluative research in the cultural learning sphere. I'm doing a lot less of that now, so I'm really focusing on Climate Museum UK. So geography, not just as a subject, but in terms of the Earth systems, geography is radically changing, and therefore geography has to be, the study of Earth systems has to be radically different too. So, for example, glacier melt is causing Earth's crust to warp slightly. That's just one of many, many ways that we could explore how the entire biosphere and all of Earth systems are changing because of human industrial action. And so actually is history, in a way, or our concept of time, because the past is no longer a reliable guide for the future. We're not able to anticipate the future by extrapolating trends. We must learn from the past in many ways, but there's also this situation that the climate, the Earth systems are so disrupted that we can't, that the future will be a situation of, critical uncertainties. So, bringing up children and developing a curriculum with that sense of that lack of clarity about the future is very, very challenging. So, so we've had an IPCC report, but actually there are 2 more working groups to come. And so one of those has been leaked already, or aspects of it. And so it says that climate change will fundamentally reshape life on Earth in the coming decades. Even if humans contain planet warming greenhouse gas emissions, there will be species extinction, more widespread disease, unlivable heat, ecosystem collapse, cities menaced by rising seas. So all of these things are pulled together in this quite unflinching report that is to come. And the choices that societies make determine whether our species thrives or, it's a massive choice that we have here. And education has a huge part to play. And the purpose of education, I think, in a way, is about illuminating and helping young people understand the complex system that their lives are enmeshed in. And one way of seeing this system is that it has become increasingly a system about extractivism. So that's so much more than the extracting of minerals. It's it's also about the extraction of life, of all forms of life, and also of knowledge and of power ultimately. So this diagram was done for a project we did called Stories of Extraction, where we were trying to understand the extractive system and biocolonialism in relation to the environmental crisis. And also the food system is a major part of this. So when people talk about climate, they usually think about energy, burning coal, but actually 60% of emissions comes from the food system. But also, the food system, it's got these kind of 2 flows of harm where there's immense ecological damage or ecosystem damage, which worsens the climate, which actually reduces our food supplies, and then the flow goes the other way too. So this is just to kind of illustrate the complexity of that relationship between climate and ecology, and how important it is that we help learners understand this. So future anxiety, we could call it many things, eco anxiety, for example, but I think future anxiety is helpful because of this radical disruption of how we might anticipate the future, how we might be able to project. So, you know, two little things, this is the hottest summer of my life, or, you know, actually, this is the coldest summer of the rest of your life. So, and also, this little thing on Twitter, young people seek counselling over climate worries. But then, of course, you've got the old grey guy, you know, denying it, demolishing those concerns, and you know, just going off on a complete sideline talking about polar bears. So it's that tendency to diminish young people's concerns, to you know, to judge young people's perspective on the future by the perspective on the future that older people, or that you know, my generation had in the past. So here are quite a few facts on, based on some research projects on what children and young people feel and think about the Earth crisis. In 2020, 70% of UK 18 to 24-year-olds are more worried about climate change than they were the year before. Over half of youth psychiatrists report that patients are anxious about the state of the planet. BBC News Round last year found that lots of children are worrying about the impact of climate on them in the future. 2/5 of them don't trust adults to tackle it. 2/3 say leaders don't listen to young people. Oxfam found that 68% of pupils want to learn more about climate change. And it goes on. Actually, a study published yesterday, I think, of climate strikers internationally, young people internationally, who have a high level of awareness. They are 65% of them are thinking about climate change every day, which is a huge burden. And of course, many of them are living with the impacts day to day, not just thinking about it in the future. So we found that children and young people, when we consult them alongside adults or perhaps on their own, they state things more bluntly than adults. Adults are more likely to express received views that show their coping strategies. They're more likely to kind of do what we might call green hushing, which is a bit like greenwashing, but green hushing is to kind of diminish and silence, you know, even what one might be positively doing to tackle the climate situation. So, but children and young people haven't developed those kinds of strategies. We did some, when I say we, I mean with my Flow hat, we've been doing research into public attitudes to food sustainability, and the young people and children are more likely to say very overtly, you know, ruining the environment isn't an option, there's no planet B, and that they're also likely to come up with quite bold and creative ideas for how to tackle the situation. So, for example, young people said, let's completely reinvent McDonald's and make it go vegan, you know, or create an alternative chain of McDonald's. Of course, adults would say that's impossible and put up barriers, but children don't necessarily see those. And then also teachers are feeling this challenge too. In a survey with Friends of the Earth, 3/4 of teachers said that they feel ill-equipped to teach on the subject. And a Teach for Future survey found a similar number. 70% of teachers feel that they've had inadequate training. So moving on, I'll tell you a bit about our project, where we were commissioned by A New Direction, which is the London Bridge Organisation for Cultural Education. They commissioned 5 strands, and we were one of them. With young Londoners in mind, how can cultural learning and the creative sector respond to the Earth crisis? So we consulted with teachers, with parents, with cultural workers, and with young people. And of course, the most important was young people, but it was really important too for this research that we created ideas that would enable the cultural and education sectors to respond to those voices of young people. So young people said, don't bracket out the earth crisis, acknowledge it in all of your programs. It should be weaving through. It's the ground the ground on which we live. It's the, it is the world in crisis. And so everyone talked about wanting to carefully design opportunities to explore this earth crisis. So they talked about, the emotional burdens, the complexities. So we need to really carefully design those experiences. Young people didn't want to be pigeonholed as eco-activists, and they didn't want to be burdened with the challenge of saving the planet. They said that this isn't really something in the distant future, it's here now, and we all have to pull together. We had some discussions about individualism or collectivism, and it was on the whole younger people talking more about collectivism. So not entirely, but another key thing is that confidence to speak, to have voice, is only really possible when young people and adults have the knowledge, so that when they stand up to speak about something so difficult and important, they are really confident about what they're saying. There's a real need for trauma sensitive adult support. I mean, all of us that work in this area, we all have dark nights of the soul. We all feel, quite an emotional burden. So there's a real need to acknowledge the trauma that we're facing. And meaningful youth voice requires a profound awareness of needs, and sustainable cultural learning has to be intersectional and also ecocentric. So it isn't possible to just do kind of like green projects that are just about greening our life around us. It has to be fully looking at justice issues and also the more than human perspective. So the calls to action were, we need more funding for cultural learning that's dealing with this. We need to build professional capacity. We need to encourage visible statements of commitment and explore multi-solving cultural initiatives for London. I'm going to try and race through now some pointers for a more experimental practice. And there's a lot of different themes here, so I'll try and be quick. So learning from Renee Lertzman and her work on behavior change and psychology. So we need to understand people's responses in, what causes people to deny, disavow, and rationalize when faced with this crisis. So education needs to help discover the truths and histories of the past, deal with the emotional response to living with impacts, and explore solutions and grow an appetite for systemic change. So we have to do all of those three. Thinking about coping strategies. So, a lot of work on climate psychology is about how we might cope, but here's a provocation. Should we teach children and young people to cope with or adapt to a harmful, suicidal, ecocidal system? You could argue that we absolutely need them to be kind of radicals, radical system changes. But of course, that's hugely challenging within the system. A bit more about climate coping strategies. So it's been found, and the link there links to research studies, that the most effective coping strategies are those that are prefigurative. So this is when it's not just about expressing emotions or working things out logically. It's about when you actively experiment and imagine and then form an alternative life. And so that is really difficult for children and young people because they don't have the choice. They don't have choices often to, change their diets or, change how their schools work. But how, so we need to ask, how can we enable those most effective prefigurative strategies? One starting point is to use visualization, art and visions, encourage visions of transition and support And so we can actually enable the vision of the better, more sustainable world. These are just two collages. I make art, and I've made these collages to try to explain what extractivism is in contrast to a more regenerative vision. We need to embed echo capacities across the curriculum or across any learning programs. And by echo capacities, I'm going beyond literacy, beyond echo literacy, to include bodily skills, making, imagination, care for others, the humanities, and that kind of holistic understanding, which is about connectedness to all life. And we also maybe need to enable children and young people to understand the conundrums around the climate debate, you know, the conflicts and the uncertainties. So, you know, using maybe philosophy to explore the subtleties or nuances of debate. And is there a role maybe for comedy? So one of my favorite organizations, Onca in Brighton, they're going to show this play called Planet LOL. You know, this is another provocation. You know, is comedy appropriate? I think that with children and young people, it is appropriate if it's dealt with in a way that does acknowledge their feelings and takes them seriously. And this is one of our principles in Climate Museum UK. It's about being positopian. So this is about expanding the cone of possible futures, helping people shift from either fixed positions of dystopia, you know, fear of the future, to utopia, which is, you know, extreme wishful thinking, to weave together, you know, the realities, the possibilities of the worst cases, and help people imagine how we might live in a more regenerative way. We might also think about the role of culture and creativity as perhaps, you know, what if we put them at the heart of the donut to create this safe and just space for humanity. And finally, no, I think that is my final slide. So you can find this if you Google or search "culture takes action," but the slides actually contain notes. So there are some links and resources in the notes, and I can make them shareable. So I've finished now. I don't know how much time we have left.
Thank you so much, Bridget. Thank you. Well, we've definitely got at least maybe 15 minutes. What I was going to say is if anyone feels comfortable too, you can come on video. We definitely want to make this a comfortable environment. If anyone wanted to share any questions. Hi everyone. I have some maybe to start us off, or if anyone's got any that are jumping out straight away. I'm going to start you off with mine. Language. So one of the things that came across with what you were presenting is there is terminology that you were just confident to use and words that you weren't scared about, like crisis, emergency, eco-anxiety, all this very technical language, which I think there are some educators who are really scared about using those in the classroom because they fear that then creates this sense of runaway, you know, kind of depression. I don't know what your response is to that.
Well, I suppose I would always argue that that in a critical situation, the relationship between teacher and student has to shift so that it is much more a relationship of shared inquiry and collective care. So, you know, asking young people what words they use. I've got an activity which is it's an envelope full of words on leaves, and we use this in activities where we get the leaves out and enable participants to put them on a tree, or to make a sort of tree shape, you know, and to decide what is the trunk and what are the roots, you know, what are the root words, like nature is a root word, you know, place is a root word. Others are more diverse, you know, you might have multiple different words for things that is more debatable, like Holocene or Anthropocene. So, you know, helping young people understand, and teachers understand, that words are provisional, that they're just symbols for things. there is no, and I don't know, maybe that would help overcome that sense of fear somehow, if we all have our kind of root words or our bone words, and that they can still shift. Does that, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else with another question? Anthony.
Thank you, Bridget. That was really, really fascinating. Thank you, Paul, for organising this. I think your focus on food was really, really correct, and certainly coming from a primary teaching perspective. Even today, I was talking to a teacher, and she was describing how some of their local area geography they were going to do was go to the local high street and look at a yam and think, how did that yam get to us? And when I started to broaden out the possibilities of the story of that yam and the journey that's been on and the impacts that that yam is causing, is it right for us to be importing those yams? Who's importing those yams? Are they better or worse for the environment? So all the sorts of stories about food, particularly because they do have such a climate impact, I think are really powerful and do actually engage me and engage the children and the teachers as well, I think.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just showing. So we use a lot of objects, we are a museum. So we use handling objects. And so, for example, orangutans, and you might just let children ask lots of open questions about it, but then it leads to discussions about palm oil and deforestation. We've got a black treacle tin, the relationship between sugar and colonialism and health, and this kind of very imperial kind of tin, the design of it. Pringles, the Pringles tin is like it's what is the worst offender for packaging. It's got the most elements, so it's really very unrecyclable. But one young person said, once you pop, you can't stop. And once you've opened the sort of like Pringles box of understanding climate change, you can't stop thinking about it. So, objects have these kind of multiple open-ended routes for understanding. So yeah, going to a high street or a supermarket and looking beneath the surface is and then potentially, practically, cooking and growing. The research that we did with, we spoke to hundreds of people in India, Brazil, and the UK. Cooking and growing is some of the most powerful learning practice for families and children, and very empowering. When there were some children that actually managed a kind of community garden in Brazil. So yeah, food is very inspiring, I think.
Bridget, I'm going to jump to another thing that was in my mind. Sorry, it was another question I had that came early on that was about this idea that we often emphasize climate activists, and we sort of encourage that behavior and put the young people who are in those positions on pedestals and that relationship with that. And the idea, it seemed like in your research you found that actually young people just want that to be normalized, that that's everyone's responsibility and it's not a select few. And I think that's an interesting one that a lot of teachers are still trying to grapple with, this idea of should we idolize these sorts of young people, or should we try and normalize the reaction?
Really good question. And I think it comes down to celebrity culture, which is sort of the individual that gets demonized and praised. Greta is both demon and heroine, or hero. And I would rather foreground the voices. We do a lot of work with Greta's speeches because her language is great, not necessarily her face. So there's a great resource by the Serpentine called Power Pack. It's a climate learning resource, and it's actually very simple. It takes the very simple quotes of some Indigenous and Black young climate activists. They are celebrated visually, but at the same time, it's the words that matter. It's the meanings that matter. they're often very good at coming up with these, you know, phrases and ways of articulating, and that should be celebrated and used.
I have got another question, but I'm keen for other people to have the opportunity to throw things in as well. Does anyone else?
Why not go for it?
Well, I love the way that you frame that idea that geography is radically changing, because I've read a lot of things about the whole idea that, you know, we built buildings at a time, at a point where the climate was different to the climate is now. And all of our infrastructure was built when the world was different, kind of in a very physical sense around the climate. And that's a different way of thinking as well. And that maybe by tipping the idea that, you know, we're saying, oh, we need radical geography in the classroom. Well, actually, that's maybe a response as well to this idea that geography is radically changing. The world is radically changing. I don't know what people think maybe in the wider group as well about that.
I suppose I had a similar question. Do you mind if I jump in? Sorry. Thanks for organising this event, and thank you, Bridget, for your really excellent talk. Just, do you think education is lagging behind all of the research and knowledge that is now accruing, not just about the climate and how it's changing itself, but also about the possibilities for change, the alternatives, like the economic understanding? Because I noticed you had a diagram of the donut economics at the end, that kind of thing. Shouldn't we be finding a way for this to be central to the curriculum?
I know more about arts education than I do about geography education. You know, in the museum and arts education world, we don't hugely interact with geography as a profession. You know, it's more about history, science, and the arts. So I don't know enough in order to judge. But in general, I think that in the UK, especially in England, the national curriculum, you know, we're still with a very kind of regressive, repressive even curriculum system, and I think it isn't just about the content of the curriculum; it's about the concept of what education is for. That it is about, you know, creating people that are skilled for a world that has passed, you know, for a world of extractive industry, of extracting wealth from the rest of the world, you know, of increasing abstraction and specialization in, you know, financial industries and so on, and technology. And we are going to have a kind of radical shift in terms of thinking about careers. So I think this is where education is way behind, really, not so much in teaching what matters out there in the world, but enabling young people to envision themselves living in a radically different world, where they're going to have to know about food, going to have to know about plants and how to protect their houses from flooding. They'll learn it by practice if they don't learn it from school. And or they may die or starve, you know. I mean, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, Bridget, when you were talking about the idea of envisaging alternative futures and that process, you know, there's different ways that you framed that, but that I think is a really interesting way to think of the role of a teacher as about opening up students' minds rather than narrowing them down. And then you can think about that in the context of curriculum and assessment and all those sorts of things, and the processes that make that happen within the education system. And how can we flip that so that instead we're asking that question, you know, the Rob Hopkins does the sort of what if question. It's that same sort of idea.
Yeah, and I think it can be done, you know, with excitement and passion and, you know, creativity. And it, you know, and this is why I talk about this post-utopian idea that you have to craft these learning experiences in a way that is absolutely evidenced by science, that is even going beyond, you know, the disciplines of science to try to engage with systems thinking, and the kind of interconnection of climate and ecological systems. And it's really essential to learn to take that kind of that reality, to try to understand how we might ride it, how we might solve problems together collectively. So I think, yes, social and emotional education is hugely important too. We're kind of running out of time, but that's an entire second hour of discussion probably. That, you know, the need for compassion and justice.
Yeah, and then how you can bring that into the classroom is often, that's the really challenging bit, how to do that genuinely and convey that sense of emotion and feeling and all that. I wondered, while we've got Anthony here as well, that idea that I think geography has often sold itself as being able to do what you were just talking about, Bridget, in that sense of systems thinking, and, you know, we've got the language and the framework to do that. But I wonder, are we suggesting that maybe it falls short slightly?
Could I quickly answer? I think it's actually the IPCC science that falls short. And so therefore any, you know, teaching or what, you know, promotion that we might do of it is hampered. Yeah. Sorry to jump in.
No, I wasn't quite sure what you were asking me, Paul, there. Sorry.
No, I think you've probably got a better handle of me in terms of that sense of what it is that geography sets out to do, its vision and its framework of what the subject kind of says it does. Because often the response is that
Go on.
No, sorry, you go.
No, I was just going to say that it's that connection and interconnection, which is clearly important to do within geography itself, but it is how this ties in with the past and a possible future. And it's that futures thing that's often missing, because geography and history are often seen as bedfellows. There's obviously a story of how the world has been that's got us to where we are, but it's making those connections to, like you say, to art, to physical activities, education, to being outdoors, that actually good primary teaching can do and can be quite liberating. But you're right, quite often now we are in subject silos. We're not breaking out the box as much as we perhaps used to, and that is damaging actually for some practice, because there are some more creative options that maybe I would have advocated in the past that in the current way of working isn't perhaps as foregrounded, sadly. So can be quite reductive at times, which I'd love to see be far more available.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in because we do have 1 minute left, but I'm going to stick to this idea that this is time constrained. So I know Anthony's offered that we could maybe we could find a way to keep the meeting running, but I think I've shared some of this on social media, and hopefully this leads to further conversations and interactions. So this isn't the end, this is the beginning of a conversation. So thank you everyone for coming along, and thank you, Bridget, for, you know, the presentation was excellent, so thank you.
Thank you for asking me to come. It was good to meet you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.